We're going to return you to our top story, Friday's terror attack. Questions posed over how the killer, Moazzam Begg, was free to carry out the murders and the way in which he apparently misled those who sought to rehabilitate him when he was in prison. Well, the charity Cage, which has itself been criticised by Amnesty, amongst others, has been critical of de-radicalisation schemes in prison. Moazzam Begg works for Cage. He's also a former Guantanamo Bay detainee, of course. Moazzam Begg, welcome to you. Moazzam Begg was in prison for 8 years. He seems to have hoodwinked the people who thought that they de-radicalised him. Was he a good liar, or were they naive?
Well, I think, there are so many processes he's had to go through. Of course, he was convicted. He was arrested primarily by the police. Then there's the Crown Prosecution Service. Then there's the prison service. Then there's the de-radicalisation program he'd have to go on. Then there's the desistance and disengagement program he'd have to go on from within prison. And then once he's released on licence, he's actually cleared by the police to go and take part in this conference. He's on a tag. He's also has to not, I believe, communicate with his co-defendants or other people that he may have been radicalised with, and he has to go to this sort of halfway house where he has to sign in and check in and be monitored. So he's gone through a series of processes, and in addition to that, I believe the security services, MI5, would have been watching him. So with all of that, all of the entire arms of the state scrutinising this individual, for him to come through, clearly there's massive failures that have happened, and I don't know whether he duped them or they were allowed to be duped, but nonetheless, and obviously the worst thing is that he's at a place where people are actually advocating for people like him to be rehabilitated and so forth, and he goes on to kill them.
I mean, in a sense, without being excessively po-faced about this, I mean, if he kills people, he kills people. In a sense, it doesn't matter who he's killing. The point is he's murdered people, and that in and of itself is a truly awful thing. Professor David Wilson, the well-known criminologist, has been on Sky this morning. He says part of the problem here is that you're left with a tick box exercise. People learn the answers. They know what the invigilators want to hear. That's what they tell them. They know if they play the game, they'll get out.
I mean, that's possible. No one's going to say that that's not possible. I think there's a wider question here to be had, and I think, in my view, first of all, look, the people that were killed actually were campaigning against this, the introduction of sort of knee-jerk laws, which I think the current government is proposing. But the other thing, of course, the wider context is this, is that we have almost every year had a new law, a new anti-terror law passed every year since the beginning of the war on terrorism. We've launched several wars against terrorism.
Do you still use that phrase?
What's that, sorry?
Do you still use that phrase?
Which phrase?
War on terrorism, war on terror.
Well, I think there are wars on terrorism, wars and laws on terrorism at the moment that are being passed. And it hasn't made us safer. In fact, if anything, we saw in 2017 an attack take place exactly on London Bridge by Khurram Butt, who led that attack, using the same modus operandi to use knives and then fake suicide vests. His brother was in receipt of £10,000 from the Prevent programme, which was paid by the police. And again, so you've got another process here which has totally failed. And the United Nations gave a report in 2017 which said that Prevent isn't stopping extremism, it could be causing it. So I think a lot of the legislation and measures that we haven't really done the job. And in fact, they've exacerbated the situation. There has to be a review entirely of Britain's anti-terror laws.
I mean, clearly it's a vastly complicated area, but what would you do? What would you do? Would you look to put people in there to talk to some of these prisoners who are more, how can I put it, more credible?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, I was imprisoned I wasn't in prison. I was held in remand in 2014 for attempting to send a generator to the Free Syrian Army, which the British government at the time had sent over 1,000 generators, and they were trying to prosecute me for terrorism. Now, the case against me was dropped, but whilst I was there, I did meet people who were connected to ISIS and believed in their vision and so forth. And I, with my own experience and knowledge and expertise on the ground and so forth and history, I was able to dissuade many of them just from talking to them. And they understood that people like myself and many others were talking from a very genuine position. But there will always be people, if they're determined to walk past and slip through the net, there will always be people like that. It's just, where do you create the spaces where they think people are credible enough for them to listen to and think, OK, this isn't just like you said, a tick box exercise. This is something meaningful, and this person really cares. In the case of Usman Khan, I spoke to to somebody connected to his lawyers recently, and they said that he asked for a particular individual to come along to help to de-radicalize him after he was imprisoned. And I think that stopped because of the funding was cut, that it no longer continued. So clearly there was a gap there, and my understanding is that he would have responded to that positively. But we'll never know, because it didn't complete, the process wasn't completed.
There will be some people out there who will say, if there's any doubt at all about somebody, put them in solitary confinement, throw away the key, and that way they will not be a threat to the public.
Well, the thing is that if we applied on that, then we have to apply it on everything, on murder and other serious crimes and so forth. And the danger with that is that, if we'd done that with terrorism, you'd have no Good Friday Agreement in relation to Northern Ireland, because as part of that agreement, so many convicted terrorists were released. There are always going to be situations where some kind of agreement comes with the government whereby they say, OK, we'll have to review this situation, these people can be released. And only now in hindsight, because he did this dastardly act, people are saying that we need to throw away the key. But that's not, we're a nation of laws.
That parallel with the IRA will be offensive to some people. That was an organisation which had an explicit political agenda, which was ultimately semi-attainable.
I appreciate that, but if you ask the victims of the IRA bombs, they'll tell you more than 3,000 people were killed. I mean, they even targeted 10 Downing Street and nearly killed Margaret Thatcher and the whole government there. So and bombed people in Birmingham and in Guildford and so forth, and killed innocent people. So
undeniably true. Do you, more generally, do you observe in debates about Islamism, militant jihadism, there is a tendency increasingly to dismiss people who have highly evolved ideologies? Young men, you could argue, have always been angry. They've often gripped an ideology, who are increasingly dismissed as succumbing to a type of mental illness. And that slur, if I can use it in those terms, is almost used to demonise them and persecute them, and perhaps change the dynamics of the question.
Well, I think the argument of mental illness is across the board. People said it of Darren Osborne when he carried out his attack in Finsbury Park. People said it of others, as you've said, with this young man, Usman Khan and so forth. There may be an element of mental illness, but in my view, it's just that they're very... one of the MI5 reports about radicalisation within the Muslim community actually said that the majority of people who carry out acts of terrorism know very little about their faith. And that was an MI5 conclusion that they done as a result of various studies. So one thing we can conclude, from my understanding, is that this guy or somebody like him does two acts together that are regarded as the greatest sins within Islam. The first is murder, and the second is to take your own life. And if you think that your final act somehow is going to get you to paradise and so forth, actually this is the opposite to that. And they're just, so in my view, they're not particularly sophisticated. In fact, it's the opposite. And that may be a mixture of some mental health issues. It may also be a mixture of somebody having absolutely no direction to go in life. If he thinks that that's it for me. I can never get a job anywhere. I can never go anywhere. There'll be no way for me to continue my life. He may be desperate. I don't know. But the point is that if he is a threat to society, then he should have, in my view, been kept away until that threat has been recognised as no longer credible to the public.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was as far as we know, no video left. There was a kind of nihilism.
That's another interesting point, is because, again, you don't even know why he's doing it then.
Moazzam Begg, I've got to leave it there. Appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.